Okay, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to get started. My name is Kenneth Wilbur. I would prefer if you could call me Ken, because that's been my name my whole life. I realize that may feel a little too familiar for some of you. So if you want to call me Professor, I welcome that. If you want to call me Professor Ken, I'll welcome that also. The label Professor Wilbur never felt quite right to me, so I kind of don't like that one. But if that's all you can call me, I'll work with you. I'll answer to that. I've been here at UCSD for 13 years. Since you were in elementary school, most of you. I wish I had gotten to go to a school as good as UCSD. In my experience here, I find that most of you have no idea how good this place actually is. It's truly outstanding. And it's also an outlier in the university world for how humble here are. If I was an undergraduate right now, I would definitely be either a business economics major or a data science major. And the class that I'm going to give you is the class that I wish I had had available to me when I was 20 years old. It took me another decade and a PhD to gain exposure to all the things we're going to talk about here this quarter. I co-designed this class with Dan Yavorsky, who works as a senior vice president of analytics at GBK Collective. Prior to that, he was a vice president at Bain Consulting, which is one of the big traditional consulting shops. He does this every day in his day job. He also teaches this class for us 2 or 3 quarters a year. In this section, we're very lucky that our instructional assistant is Kohei Hayashida. Kohei, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi everyone, I'm Kohei. This is actually the last quarter for me. I'm graduating this quarter, and after having been as a student for 10 years or something, I'll be assistant professor at the Rady College London in this summer. So this will be the last sort of session for me work as a teaching assistant, and I think I know the content well. So if you have any questions or if you have struggled with something, feel free to visit my office hour that is scheduled on Thursday 4 p.m. I guess. But anyway, I'm hoping to talk with you in this quarter. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Kohei. Our single deepest topic this quarter is going to be demand estimation. Kohei's dissertation has pushed the frontier on how we can estimate demand models, especially in perishable food categories, and then use the estimates to redesign pricing policies prior to expiration in order to increase retailer profits and reduce food waste. So he's truly a topical expert who could be teaching this class and has already been hired as a professor, just hasn't started yet. So we're really lucky to have him here. So thanks for being here, Kohei. And okay, I'm a little nervous about this. This is an experiment. We'll make a decision halfway through the quarter if we're going to continue this or not.
Customer analytics using data to drive decisions, segment price and predictive fueling career ambitions. Who buys more and why and when? What brings customers back again? Data are machine learning. Happy customers, jobs worth earning. Customer analytics using data to drive decisions, segment price and predictive fueling career ambitions.
Yeah, if you thought that was corny, yes, I agree. It was a fork of a Bruno Mars song, Count on Me.
AI did you use?
Yeah, that's no, I didn't pay for it. Yeah. We'll decide halfway through if we're gonna keep that going or not, but we'll repeat it a few times before we make that decision. As a person, I have 20 years of experience in quantitative marketing. I've done a lot of consulting. I've had some pretty interesting experiences along the way in a bunch of different domains. My research has mostly been related to advertising and digital platforms. Some current projects involve collaboration on field experiments with Meta, study of online gambling, study of tipping, prompts on large platforms. I have a wife and daughter. Kid is 17. She's going through it. Been there. We're lucky to have a dog and a cat, Draymond and Luca. Somebody asked me on Monday, am I a Warriors or a Lakers fan? California, West Coast. So yeah, I really don't like, sometimes people here like treat me different because of my job title or whatever, my role or whatever. I don't think of it that way. I think like we're all on a road, and I've been traveling on that road longer than you have at this point, but it's probably a very similar road. So if you're in this class, there's probably some very particular ways that your mind works similar to my mind, and those ways might be different than a lot of people who are not in this major at this university. So I feel like a real affinity with the students in this class, and I'm really happy that you're here and that I get to work with you. We're gonna just jump into the content. In customer analytics, the first step is to visualize the data. And so that's what we're gonna cover first. It's never the last step. It is not always the most important step, but it's always the first step. And I completely agree with this famous statistician, John Tukey, who said the greatest value of a picture is when it forces you to notice what you never expected to see. When you have an experience, there are aspects of that experience you can anticipate confidently, and there are aspects of that experience that you could not have anticipated that could surprise you. And when you visualize your data, you typically learn things about your data that you didn't expect to learn. And when you make a visualization and you share it with someone, you will know that your visualization was successful if they respond with a deeper question, because that indicates they accepted the fact that you provided and they started thinking about it and they're looking for something more. A fact typically leads to a question, which is not usually the measure of success we're trained to think about. But that's how we measure if our visualization succeeded. If it elicits a deeper question. So we're going to go through a couple of examples of visualizations that I really like, and we're going to use those to make a couple of more general points. The first one is that humanity has been visualizing data for thousands of years. This image was taken from a clay tablet that was found in an archaeological site in Mesopotamia, that's northwestern Iraq, if I'm not mistaken, nearly 4,000 years ago. And the archaeologists attempted to translate the data. This is a ledger. So someone was providing construction services. They recorded the names of their customers in the right-hand column. The variables in the data set include things like payment expected, payment made, quantity of labor provided. Now, the very unusual thing about this is that these data were recorded before the concept of zero was invented. And therefore, it's an open question if the blank cells in this spreadsheet were measured zeros or if they just weren't filled in yet. And even though that's an unusual property here, it remains highly relevant today. When you get a data set, it's often hard to tell when data is missing, that means unmeasured, or when it's been measured as zero and the data actually indicate a zero because it's absent. So that's going to be, if you have a career in analytics, zero versus missing this, that's going to come up over and over and over again. And the implications can be very different depending on whether it's true zero or whether it's just missing. I'll show you an example of that in a couple minutes. I think this graphic from the Office of the Surgeon General is quite an effective example of a visualization. So on the x-axis, we've got genders, and we've got people classified by how much alcohol they drink over the course of their lifetime. And so the categories are less than 1 drink a week, on average 1 drink a day, on average 2 drinks a day. And the y-axis shows the cumulative lifetime risk of cancer incidence for a number of cancers that have been directly linked to alcohol consumption, including breast cancer, which is the main reason that the low alcohol bar is much higher for women than for men. Breast cancer is a very common cancer. And what the data show is that the more a person drinks on average, the more likely they are to get cancer. And I like this graphic for 2 reasons. One reason is that it's a grave topic. It's a very important decision that people make throughout their lifetime, but it treats things in a straightforward way. And they make it easy to look at, even though it is such a serious topic. The second reason I like it is that psychological studies show that most people have a really hard time understanding what a percentage means. That's called numerical fluency. However, they do understand if you say something increases by 5 people out of every 100 people, that is a framing that most people do understand. And so this graph presents it both ways. It explains in easy to understand words that a broad audience could internalize and act upon how the absolute risk changes between the 2 groups. Now, this graphic succeeded for me because it led me to the deeper question, which is, why does alcohol cause cancer?
Yeah. Maybe why people drink.
Oh, that's an easy. Well, yeah, why do they drink when they're gonna get cancer? I mean, now remember, this is regular drinking quantities over a lifetime, right? So it's not just why did I drink Saturday night, it's why did I drink this amount every week over a 40 or 50-year period.
Maybe why women more likely to get cancer from drinking?
Okay, so we get a larger delta here, about 5% delta compared to about 3% over here. For me, this led me to a different question than what's been proposed so far. My question was, is this a causal effect? Is the quantitative increase shown because they drank alcohol in these quantities? Or is this a correlation? Do the people who drink more also get cancer more? And that's the difference that we're seeing here. Because if it's a causal effect, which the language right here seems to imply, about 3 more men out of 100 would develop cancer due to consumption of 2 drinks per day, due to consumption. Sounds like a causal effect to me. Causal effect means if you change X, then Y will change by this amount. Or in a more general formulation, if you change the probability distribution of X, then the probability distribution of Y will change as a result. Because if that's a causal effect, that's a very hard experiment to run. I can't randomize treatment and control into drinking a certain amount over a 40-year period. Maybe there's other ways to get that causal effect. So I go deeper into the source material, and it's a correlation. Those are correlations they're reporting, and they're maybe over-interpreting the data, I think it's fair to say. And as public health specialists, it's not too surprising that they want people to be healthier. And if over-interpreting the data is going to be consistent with that goal, I'm not shocked. I'm not sure I'd make that choice myself, but that was the deeper question it led me to. But I still think it's a really good visualization. Okay, we'll get to another example in just a minute. The reason visualization is always the first step. There's multiple reasons. 1, it's relatively easy. 2, a lot more people can understand graphics than can understand models or more sophisticated analytical frameworks. If you look at the amount of the gray matter in your head that exists to translate your visual perceptual input into concepts that your higher order cognitive functions can work with, it is a substantial amount of your brain that goes into that automatic function. We are really, really good at interpreting visual data and comparing it to what we expect to see. Now, in the world, data scientists have training in a lot of different disciplines. Economics, big one. Stats is a big one. Computer science is a big one. Data science is getting bigger, but still somewhat limited as a share of total analytic professionals. There are a lot more. Mathematics, there's a lot of math PhDs who go into analytics. A lot of natural science PhDs, many of whom were hoping to, get like a faculty position someday. There weren't any, and so they went into analytics to make a better living, support their family. These disciplinary foundations tend to be very, very different from each other in multiple ways, in the tools that they teach, in the assumptions that they share, in even their philosophical approach to what does it mean to know something. In math, that's quite different than in economics. In the role of theory in generating expectations, there even in the language that they use. So the experience I had that really brought this home for me was I did a 5-month consulting residency at Google, where I mostly spent time at Google Analytics and YouTube with a team called the Video Quants. And it was a team of 30 PhDs that had mostly been so they had bought a bunch of startups. And usually each startup would bring 1 or 2 analytics people with PhDs. And they would retain those staff, and then they would put them on Video Quants. And so there were people with all these different trainings. And the thing that really surprised me at first was they did not trust each other to tell the truth consistently. And there were a handful of people in the team that had been caught lying, fabricating analyses. And I think as a result of this, where they spent most of their time was on making and sharing visualizations. Because the one type of analytics that is present in every academic discipline is graphics. Every single field graphs their data. And because it's relatively easy to do, it's relatively easy to replicate. So if somebody's gonna lie to you and you want to check it, the graphic is the easiest thing to check. So if somebody can check what you say really easily, probably not gonna lie using a graphic. So that's when I say it's a lingua franca. That means like a common language. That's one of the values of visualizations. Okay, another example that I really like. This graph shows, this was made in 2015. It shows the population of the planet Earth from 1750 up to 2015, including projections going forward up to 2100. And so at the time they made the graph, it was about 7.4 billion people. That was 11 years ago. We're at about 8.2 billion right now, give or take a couple hundred million. But growth is slowing down, and we're projected to only reach 11 billion by the end of this century. And in fact, if you draw that projection out farther, total population is projected to start decreasing in the 2100s. Now, the red line is the growth rate, the tangent to the curve. This curve is called an S-curve or a sigmoid, which by definition means that growth accelerated and then it decelerated. And so since the red line shows the growth rate at each point in time, you can see that the growth rate grew exponentially for multiple decades. Really starting at about 1920, we had a step change in the growth rate. So that was shortly after World War I, right? And then the growth rate more than tripled over the next 40, 45 years. And then after that, oh my gosh, we're almost down to zero. Well, we're projected to almost hit zero in the future. Now, you may have some empathy with this insane demographer named Ehrlich, who wrote a really famous book, started working on it in 1964, published it in 1968, called The Population Bomb. So that's right around here. Ehrlich saw this nearly vertical growth rate and assumed it would keep going. And noticed that fruit production was only increasing linearly. And that combination of factors led him to some very sharp policy prescriptions. As you can read on the cover, while you are reading these words, like this sentence, 4 people will have died from starvation, most of them children. That sounds awful. And at the top, population control or race to oblivion. I don't know exactly what race to oblivion means, but it sounds bad. So this guy argued for strict population control policies to be adopted immediately all over the world. And I don't exactly know the relationship, but it was shortly after the book was published, not too long after, that China adopted the one-child policy. Obviously, this guy was spectacularly wrong. Because if all those people starved, why did population continue growing? Right? I don't think we got the mass starvation that he promised us. And I don't know why he assumed that the linear growth in agricultural production would continue when we had a whole bunch of more people that could go start working on farms and help to produce more food. But I think his key error was assuming that the exponential growth that had been going on for a long time would continue into the indefinite future. It is very hard to find cases where exponential growth continues without ever leveling off. And we can talk about the factors that changed that growth pattern. The major one is the improvements in infant mortality due to modern medicine. 200 years ago, if a couple had a baby, it was a 70% chance that baby would live to age 5. 30% infant mortality at age 5, 200 years ago. Today, it's over a 99% chance in most countries. We're still coming down that curve in some developing countries. So this is a pattern that's been replicated a bunch of times as economies develop, infant mortality improves. And now, instead of it being a lottery, whether a given baby makes it to age 5, it's highly certain that if you get pregnant, there's a very good chance you're going to be raising that child who's going to become an adult. That takes the guesswork out of family planning. It enables people to time their fertility. And then, of course, you also have contraception, you have changing religious and moral standards, and we end up with much smaller nuclear families in the developed economies. Okay, we're going to come back to this. So this was the deeper question this graph led me to. Why did that growth rate exhibit such a sharply changing pattern? We're going to come back to that idea of exponential growth a little later in the talk. Another example, this is personal. This is my favorite visualization that I've made. Across the x-axis, we have minutes during the first full hour of the NFL season opener in 2015. And they don't show up too well on the projector, but if you're looking at the webpage or the PDF, you'll see the shaded bars indicating which minutes of the hour contained commercials, which is like a lot of those minutes had commercials. And across the top, you see the estimated national audience in each minute of the hour. And it's sort of an EKG pattern where when the commercial comes on, it dips, not too much, and then it resumes after the commercials are gone. And then on the left-hand y-axis, you see the Google search volume for all queries containing either the word FanDuel or the word DraftKings, which were relatively new services at that time, offering daily fantasy sports gambling nationwide, which was an unfamiliar concept for most consumers. And there were 4 commercials for the category during this hour, 2 for DraftKings, 2 for FanDuel, and I didn't have to even mark them on the graph where they occurred because it's obvious. Because every time one of those 2 commercials came on, Google search for that brand jumped by a factor of 15 to 25. And the jump lasted less than 5 minutes in all 4 cases. And in all 4 cases, the competitor got a significant positive spillover. So I just never had the good fortune to visualize data with such a sharp signal. And one of the things that came out of this was I had a conversation with the director of marketing research for FanDuel. It was very clear in the conversation she didn't know this was happening. So the next question was, why didn't she know? And that became clear also. She had 3 external agencies. TV ad agency responsible for buying the TV ads. Digital advertising agency responsible for buying the Google search ads that would appear above the organic results every time somebody searched the brand. And a website analytics and search engine optimization agency responsible for monitoring the website analytics. There was no mechanism for these agencies to talk to each other, much less coordinate. And in fact, the TV ad agency and the digital ad agency at the time, they were competing for the limited budget that FanDuel allocated across its advertising channels. Today, things are much better integrated across those channels. Okay, I think this might be our last example of visualizations that I like. This was made by my colleague, Karsten Hansen, a brilliant guy, teaches in our MSBA program. He saw that you could download all of the crime reports data from San Diego Police Department. And so he mapped the crime reports. What area is shown in this map? Okay, I'm trying to throw you a softball. Thank you. What do you notice about this graph? Tell me what you see.
I see it's all kind of localized around campus and like Nobel Drive.
There's a bunch of, where's Nobel Drive? Is that right here?
Yeah.
A bunch of crimes reported on Nobel Drive.
There are lots of weapons and overall.
Lock your cars. Or don't lock it so they don't have to break the window. You could go either way if you're not keeping anything in it.
It's like most of them are near the road. Like, how many of them are vacant?
Thank goodness. We're not getting people dragged into canyons too often. Stay off the roads if you want to stay safe.
It seems to be more like off-campus housing than on campus.
Ah, okay. This is what jumped out to me. What's that? 7 crimes reported within campus. And this is 1 year of data.
Campus and toy lines might be missing some data because I got a whole lot more texts for crimes on campus than.
That, I think, is the key point here. How many people live in that campus? I don't know the exact number, but I know it's more than 10,000 people. I don't think it's 7 crimes reported in a year. I wish it were that safe. This is a safe campus. I used to work at USC. Oh my God, the emails you would get, the crime notifications were out of control. But you're right, we're missing data here. And we were upfront about it. This is San Diego Police Department crime reports. If you are a victim of a crime on campus, who should you call? Campus police. Is it UCPD? Okay, it's not UCSD PD, UCPD. And you'll probably have a much better experience with them than you would have with San Diego Police. I live downtown. I've had to call a couple of times. It doesn't always go well. Nobody comes, yeah, this is missing data. So don't use this to decide whether to stay on campus or move off campus. Because we don't have the data here to inform that decision directly. We can only inform moving off campus and maybe which neighborhoods might be relatively safer than others for which types of crimes. Okay, so I promised you measured zeros versus missing data. This comes up really frequently. So this is an example here. So if you didn't see that right away, that's something to bake into your recognition function when you see a visualization. And it speaks to the idea, what's called data provenance. Regrettably, we typically cannot assume that customer data sets are complete and accurate. In my career, I've probably, ballparking it, I've probably deeply investigated something like 50 syndicated commercial data sets produced by firms that make their money by producing and selling data to other businesses. I think I've found errors or weaknesses, like structural weaknesses, in probably half of those data sets. And sometimes those are big weaknesses and sometimes they're relatively small. But my point is, I spend time seeking to understand every syndicated data set that comes to my desk because experience has taught me that I cannot trust that they're accurate. There is one type of customer data that does tend to be very accurate, and that is financial data. That is why we have accountants, to track the money that comes in, where it goes out to, how the money flows. Their auditing procedures they tend to be excellent. Internal financial data tends to be highly trustworthy. I personally have never found an error in internal financial data. Every other aspect of customer data does not receive similar auditing attention, generally speaking. Doesn't mean that there are not excellent customer data sets, just that most of them are not excellent, and you can't assume that they're excellent. You have to be somewhat suspicious. So provenance, it's how are the data produced? Where do the measurements come from? How are they processed afterward? How are they audited? Can we verify things? When can we trust it? When I was in one of those big corporations I mentioned, I was surfing the intranet, the internal network, and I happened across a data set of all US households produced by Experian, the credit reporting agency. And to my surprise, I was able to download that data set to my local computer. It's a failure of data controls internally. And so I never got to play with that data before, so I was really interested what was in there. And so there were a couple hundred records for US households, and there were a couple hundred variables describing each household. So what's the first thing you do when you get that data set?
Filter the data
For what?
in specific categories, specific areas, potential.
Be more specific.
Make sure it's useful. The number, all right.
It's not what I did.
You understand what the variables describe?
They were pretty clear. They were labeled in ways that I could understand. We're describing some processing steps. That's not what I did to start out with.
Filter by credit score.
Interesting. You could look at some credit scores or the distribution of credit scores. Let me tell you what I did. I looked up myself. Because I know the truth about myself. And therefore I can evaluate the truthfulness of exactly one record in that enormous data set, which is my first indicator of how much I could trust it. And what I found was that they had me in 4 different income categories simultaneously. And they had me as accurately recorded at the time being single, but inaccurately recorded also being married and also being divorced. They had me as a cat owner, which I was not at that time. They had a bunch of stuff, a bunch of true things and a bunch of contradictory false things. Now, this was probably about 2011 or 12. And I had moved a number of times in the preceding years. And the way they were making inferences about household attributes were based on accurate records linked to physical mailing addresses. And so, especially in rental properties that people moved into and out of somewhat frequently, they would make probabilistic inferences which attributes pertained to which households that had lived at that address. And that was the reason they had these contradictory indicators in the data set associated with my record. And I think they've cleaned it up a lot in the intervening time. But the point is, I got a new data set. I didn't know how accurate it would be. I looked at the case where I knew the truth for sure to start with. Because if it's very noisy, I'm not going to spend a lot of effort cleaning or filtering or wrangling the data. So first I want to evaluate how accurate is it. And I am a huge advocate based on hard-won experience of garbage in, garbage out. If the data set is noisy, it is probably, if it's too noisy, it's probably going to be useless. Doesn't matter what model you apply to it. If it's too noisy, you're going to be wasting your time. So it's better to go get a better data set rather than wasting a bunch of time trying to analyze a lousy data set. Obviously speaking in generalities here, it depends on the specifics as to how you operationalize this, but this is what I've learned through experience. I wish I had all those hundreds of hours back. Okay. I asked a friend of mine who is a data journalist at the Washington Post what I should tell you guys about visualizing data, because I think they tend to have really good graphics. And his name is Jeremy Merrill, and he said, graphics journalists urge that each chart should make exactly 1 point, and it should be obvious how to read it. And he said there are 4 basic types of charts. These print a little small, so you can always, if you're in the web, you can always open in a new tab. And the first type, he said, is called number goes up. And so an example of that is this graph of US GDP over the last couple of generations. And generally speaking, the number goes up. The second one, he calls number goes up or down when some event occurred. And so he made this visualization graphing the number of Twitter followers for Republican and Democrat politicians in the weeks before and after Elon Musk took control of Twitter. And with 4 years of observation after that, it's easy to say you would have known what happened immediately. But back then, within just a couple of weeks, the data had made it really clear before it had become completely clear publicly. The third category, he called one set of lines diverges from another set of lines. And so a good example here is this graph showing the percentage of GDP that the US spends on healthcare compared to other similar industrialized democracies. By the way, if I were in your shoes and I were looking for a job right now, I would strongly consider healthcare. I think that's a very promising area, partly because of this pattern, which shows very few signs of reversing in the near future. And the fourth category he called the distribution is bimodal. And then, you know, Jeremy being Jeremy, he slipped in here. Scientific charts are often the opposite of this. They have 4 variables, 6 symbols, and are explained 2 pages away. And yeah, he's right. I'm guilty, along with many of my colleagues. But when you're making graphics for managers, this is usually good advice. Make it really simple, make it clear, make it hard to misunderstand. And you do have a ton of degrees of freedom in how you make the graphic. And so to illustrate that, I'm gonna show you this one data set, 100 visualizations example. And I'm only showing 4 out of the 100 that are available at the link at the bottom of the slide. The data set there is there at the top, which is counting World Heritage Sites in 3 countries at 2 points in time. So just 6 numbers, really tiny, tiny data. And I pulled out 6 graphics that I think each emphasize a distinct comparison within that tiny data set. And so if I were to describe the takeaway of this first one, I would say Denmark is growing the fastest. It's adding heritage sites at the highest proportional rate. And if I were to describe the second one, I would say Sweden has the most heritage sites, because the minor color variation between the 2 time points is sort of de-emphasizing the time dimension, and the area is kind of emphasizing the cross-country dimension. And then if I were gonna summarize this third one, we're bringing a map into it. So if you're familiar with this region of the world, you know Denmark is much smaller geographically than Sweden or Norway. So you might say Denmark has the most heritage sites per square kilometer. And then this fourth one down here illustrates that Sweden hasn't grown a lot, but Denmark and Norway grew a lot more than Sweden grew between the two time points. And this fifth one, I think, emphasizes something different we haven't mentioned yet. Denmark has leapfrogged Norway in the number of heritage sites. And then the last one, to me, is about the total number of heritage sites overall. We're growing the number of heritage sites by this amount. We have a lot more than we used to have. Now, all based on the exact same data with 94 others at the website if you want to go through it. But as you can see, there's some real creative degrees of freedom here to say what you think you want to say when you visualize the data set. And you can use that power for good, or you can use it to mislead people. You know, if you see a misleading visualization, it probably wasn't made misleading on purpose. I mean, it's possible, but it's usually more likely inattention or lack of skill. What would you say is the problem in this example graphing US population over time?
The y-axis has like a much bigger scale than the x-axis.
Yeah, by setting the max on the y-axis to 4 billion, we are giving the impression that US population has grown really slowly. If you just look at that line, you think, oh, that's barely, that's close to flat. Hasn't changed much over the last 100 years, which is not even close to accurate. It's just visually misrepresented by that design choice. That first one is my personal pet peeve. When you see the axis minimum and maximum set to maximize the illusion of variation, I mean, there are cases where that can be the right choice. But like if the y-axis starts at 22 and ends at 24.1, like we're probably cutting out large ranges of the relevant scale. So in my opinion, axes should usually start at 0 by default, unless you have a reason to deviate from that standard. Like if we're graphing the temperature of a human body, 0 probably is not the relevant starting point, unless we're including dead bodies in our sample. So there are good reasons to deviate, but this is probably the most common way that graphics mislead, is when the axes are intentionally set in strange ways. Okay, this is my final comment on data visualization. Some of my colleagues, they teach that you should start using regression to summarize a data set. And I'm going to argue that's a bad idea. It's an understandable idea because it's a lot easier than visualization. However, if you're imposing assumptions on the data set in any regression model before you even see the data. And so it kind of puts the cart before the horse. I like the way this illustration makes the point. So these four data sets have identical means and variances and covariances across the two variables in all four data sets. And so if you run a linear regression of y on x, you'll get exactly the same beta hat and exactly the same standard error in all four of those panels. But if you look at the data, each panel has very different implications from the others. The first one is a good candidate for linear regression. It's some noisy data around an increasing trend. The second one, very clearly, a linear model would be misspecified. that's a clear quadratic relationship. You need to add a quadratic term to your model if you want to summarize that data accurately. The third one, we have this incredibly strong tendency, so strong that you wonder if these are actually measuring the same thing. And then you have one outlier. And so the question is, why is that outlier there? Is that data point a different type than the others? Is it a valid outlier? Or could it have been mismeasured in some way? Did somebody enter the wrong number into Excel when they recorded their data set? Before we go further with any summary, we should try to understand why that outlier is so different than the other data points, because our reaction depends on that understanding. So that's the example of finding something you never expected to see. And then in the last example, there's no relationship at all, except one outlier, which creates the illusion of a relationship. So same prescription there. Understand, what is that outlier? Is that a valid data point, or is that something that we need to treat somehow? Okay, this is a good point to pause. Let's take 7 minutes. We'll resume at 6 o'clock. We'll talk about some of the conceptual foundations of customer management.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was fun. Yeah.
Wow, you guys are really good at being back on time. Thank you for that. We're gonna talk about some conceptual foundations for what we're gonna study this quarter. It'll be pretty short. Then we're gonna talk about this class and especially where and how I recommend you to use language models to supplement your learning. And you guys ready? Then we're gonna end with a brief exercise of stepping through our week 1 script to focus on some visualization topics in code. So the idea of a customer is that they can choose whether they give us their money or not. And what has never happened in the history of the world is someone gave their money, donated their money to a business without any expectation of a return. Yes, we donate to charity. Yes, we give to individuals who we feel like they helped us. We give tips. Sometimes we get to set our own price in exchange for valuable services that we receive. But we do not want to give our money to for-profit businesses unless those businesses do something that we care about. The customer has agency, and the business exists to serve them. He's been dead for a few years, so he's getting less popular. But Peter Drucker was the leading management theorist in the 20th century. And you can read books he wrote in the 1960s. They are short, to the point, and they hold up today. My favorite is called The Effective Executive. His claim was the purpose of business is to create and keep a customer. He said this is where it starts for the whole business. Sam Walton, who founded Walmart, said there's only one boss. It's the customer. They can fire all of us from the chairman on down simply by spending their money elsewhere. Jeff Bezos, the more modern incarnation of Sam Walton, said there's no misalignment in the long run between customer interest and shareholder interest. Because the shareholders want to keep the customers that they serve, because that's the most profitable strategy. The way to keep the customer is to continue serving the customer's interest. And that's why those two are aligned. Now, the other half of this two-word phrase is analytics. Analytics refers to a broad range of activities. The common thread is using the data to improve decisions. It was invented in the 1880s, and it really started becoming popular in the 1910s. Charles Taylor was the founder of a practice called scientific management. And some of the early wins in that area were running experiments on the length of the workday and the work week. And that is the reason why, so they ran experiments at factories. How many hours in a day maximize total output? How many hours in a week maximize total output? And that's why most places have standard 8-hour days and standard 40-hour weeks. Because if you push workers too far past 40, you often start to get declining output as their judgment deteriorates with fatigue. Now, those experiments were run in the context of physical labor in factories 100 years ago. It's an open question how well they predict the same effects in knowledge work. It very well may be that knowledge work fatigue sets in earlier than 40 hours. I think we've all had experiences where we've been tired, we've pushed through, and we've set ourselves back because we did things we didn't need to work on, or we did things poorly and later had to go in and clean it up. Now, I'm a little embarrassed to say this because I think it's so dumb. This idea of analytics was further popularized in corporate America about 15 years ago by a movie about baseball. How many people here know the book Moneyball or roughly know about it? Okay, less than a majority. So in the 2000s, there was a professional baseball team called the Oakland Athletics. They pioneered the use of rudimentary statistics to find bargains in the player free agency market. And because they were able to unearth more productive players at lower prices than their rivals, their team outperformed its relatively low payroll by a lot. The book that was written about this was called Moneyball. I think it was first published in 2005. It came out as a movie with Brad Pitt 6 years later, and it was the movie version that started to popularize the concept of using data to make better decisions in the wider corporate America type of environment. My own experience with this in the mid 2010s, I did some consulting to a very large consumer products manufacturer. This company did 50 billion in revenue annually. And at the time, they were spending over $1 billion on coupons to motivate consumer demand. And they had never previously attempted to measure the return on that $1 billion coupon investment. So spending $1 billion, what's it worth? We don't know. We haven't tried to figure that out. Now, in fairness to them, that's a very challenging question because when somebody gets a coupon, they often do what's called purchase acceleration. They stock up. They buy more than they would have bought otherwise, and then they buy less in future time periods. So there's an intertemporal substitution that occurs. But the way that our partners within the company popularized the project that we were working on, they called it internally Project Moneyball. Not Project Coupon ROI, or not Project Profit Maximization, Project Moneyball. Because that's the way they thought about it. We're gonna be like Billy Bean and measure something. And this idea of analytics, it spans a wide range of activities, which I roughly would order from less to more sophisticated, from measuring things that we haven't measured before, heuristics or rules of thumb. When this happens, do this. Graphics, we talked about that already. Once you can organize your data to graph it, you can model it. So that's usually the next step after graphing the data. And then once the model is working well and stable across time periods, you can start to use it to make predictions of what's going to happen in the near future. And then at some point, we can start automating some of the decisions that we make regularly. And then finally, optimization is where we seek to make those automated decisions to optimize constrained objective functions. And then probably the most sophisticated most companies are going to get, it's called personalization, where we use what we know about each individual customer or prospective customer to tailor our offering to them specifically. The words we use in popular practice, they keep changing. Their meanings keep getting corrupted by people who misuse them or don't know what they really are talking about. Most recently, it's AI. It'll probably be something else in a couple of years. Okay, I'm going to posit 2 laws of customer analytics. The first one is no customers, no business. Almost too simple to state. The customers bring us the revenues enable the profit. Without a profit, we cannot have a business. I've argued for the importance of customer analytics in various MBA classrooms. These are master students who typically have 2 to 10 years of work experience. They love to challenge and debate, push back. And I've gotten a lot of pushback on the importance of customer analytics from different types of people. But there's one type of person that has never pushed back. And that is people who have founded their own companies in the past. When you have been a founder, you have a different level of understanding of the importance of keeping the money coming in so that you can keep making payroll so you don't have to pay your employees out of your own pocket. Without the customers, we cannot keep the lights on. Second law of customer analytics. This is not a logical necessity. This is an empirical tendency, very strong empirical tendency. The more customers you have, the more profits you have. There can be customers who are unprofitable to serve. They may consume more resources, costly resources like product returns or support than the profit they bring to us. They may be very strategic about buying at the lowest possible price. And because some customers can be unprofitable, we can engage in the practice of firing our customers, our unprofitable customers. That's a very tricky thing to do. We're going to talk about that in depth in week 8. Now, within the business school, the discipline that focuses most on customers is called marketing. And the reason companies engage in marketing within the business school, we specify an objective of maximizing long-term profits. Maximizing profits shouldn't surprise you. But why are we restricting ourselves to long-term profits? What about short-term profits? If our goal is to maximize short-term profits, a really good way to do that is often to lie. Short-termism strongly separates our incentives from our customers' incentives. It happens all the time, but we're not going to study it. Long-term focus aligns most of our incentives with our customers' incentives. We don't only want to sell, we want to retain the customer we sell to. We want to sell to them again and again. We want them to trust us so that we can convince them to buy more things from us. This aligns many aspects of our incentives with the customer's incentives. Not everything, we still have opposite incentives on price. For example, we want bigger margin, they want bigger consumer surplus. But at least that doesn't become an ethical problem in most cases. Because there is so much short-term focus in the world, there is a lot of lying in marketing to the degree that many people who don't work in business conflate marketing with bullshit. They often say marketing when what they mean is bullshit. People who have worked in businesses, they also often misunderstand what the idea of marketing is. People who have worked in B2B companies, that is, companies that sell to other businesses, they typically think marketing is almost synonymous with sales, because that's how B2B companies usually get money, is through human sales effort. And in those organizations, marketing supports the sales function. People who have worked in B2C companies, companies that serve consumers, usually equate marketing with advertising. Because in a lot of B2C companies, what the marketing department mostly does is run the advertising efforts. But what I would argue, and I think you would agree if you think about it, if you're making a compelling offer, advertising and sales could help you to scale that offer by putting it in front of the right prospective customers. If you're not making a compelling offer, there is no amount of advertising and there is no amount of sales effort that is going to convince your customers to buy. An ad does not force anybody to buy a product. It might incite somebody's curiosity and lead them to consider it, and then they might decide to, if it makes sense for them. So I'm going to argue marketing is about meeting customer needs profitably with a long-term orientation. Doesn't mean you can't make money on short-term orientation. It's just that you're not going to want to tell your kids what you're doing, and you might get sued. And there are other problems that may come up. My favorite example of great marketing is on probably on your phone. It's definitely on your laptop. How many people in here have Netflix? And you guys are really smart. The reason I use this example is two-sided, and it wouldn't stand up without both sides. Great customer value and great profits. So we can quantify a couple of things. I'm going to use some round numbers just to keep it simple, but they're approximately accurate. So without ads, you're paying about $20 a month. Typical subscriber is watching about 60 hours per month. 33 cents per hour watched. Or you can pay a little less than half that. I think it just went up a couple weeks ago. Or you can share accounts to pay less. I don't know about you. I find it hard to find things that I want to do for 33 cents per hour, at least commercial products. You can compare it to other streaming services or a la carte rentals, which tend to cost substantially more per hour consumed. This is just the cost comparison. We haven't talked about the social benefits, watching with other people. Extremely good consumer surplus. On the profit side, Netflix says it spent about $18 billion creating and licensing content to distribute. Divide that by their subscriber base, it works out to under $5 per subscriber per month. So that's over a $75 contribution margin on the ad-free accounts. They do have high fixed costs. They're bringing in another $7 to $8 per month on the ad tier subscriptions. This is up from $4 to $5 only 2 years ago. And there are a lot of ways that they can bring that up substantially more in the future as they build out their advertising ROI infrastructure, resulting in a net profit margin of 24% for a company in a competitive category. Your typical Fortune 500 net profit margin, you're going to look at 8 to 10%. Phenomenally profitable company. They also happen to be great at customer analytics. Probably the very best company there is that I know of. I think one of the contributing strategies is the long-term management. Yes.
I just have a question. So about the consumer surplus side, what happens when we factor in the newly rise of pirating services? Since they're now both have ads.
Yeah, when we talk about a competitive category, they're competing against pirated content. And they're doing this within that competition. They have to be easier than piracy to keep some of their customers. So I would consider pirated content to be a free competitor to Netflix that they're actually mostly winning against.
Really?
Well, more than half the room had Netflix, and globally, they have far more subscribers than their paid streaming competitors. And I think in surveys that I've seen where people indicate whether they pirate video content or not, I don't see numbers that approach these subscription rates. At least not in the US. In other countries, I think it's a different context.
For like the ads you mentioned here, like, do you mean like ads while watching the shows, or like the ads which appear like on YouTube or in newsletters?
So as recently as 2015, the founder of Netflix said Netflix will never have advertising. And then in 2022, they started selling ads. And they appear unskippable within the programs. So you can save about 55% of your monthly subscription price if you tolerate ads. We call that an attentional price. So it costs you time and it costs you nuisance. So on average, an advertisement converts its users at 0.1%. So if 1,000 people see a targeted ad, on average, 1 out of those 1,000 people is going to buy the advertised product. So most ads are not going to lead to sales among most people, a large majority. A phenomenally successful ad, 0.5% conversion rate. 5 out of 1,000 people, phenomenally successful. You don't see it much higher than that most of the time for interruptive advertisements. So what that means is most of the ads you look at, you are not going to purchase that product. And so if it draws your attention, it's going to be a nuisance that doesn't result in a transaction that benefits you. So that's why you can substitute attentional price for financial price. And they were able to broaden their subscriber base by lowering the financial price among people whose attention was cheaper and whose money was more dear.
Do you think because like when you go on a pirate website, like it makes it really hard to watch it sometimes, they spam you with ads? So could that be like another way of like kind of like the attention, as you were just talking, like steering us away from that and making us go to Netflix? So you don't have to deal with all of that like spam clicking and opening up new websites and whatnot.
Yeah, that's the way a lot of those pirated sites are making money. It's more often from the spyware that they install on your machine, which they then use to load more ad impressions, which are usually they're able to get paid for those ad impressions, even though they never occurred. It's called ad fraud. And it's a multi tens of billions of dollars a year industry. So there are good reasons not to pirate things aside from saving money. Okay, I've covered most of this. I'm gonna go into an example of using customer data to make some key decisions that would be hard to do otherwise. A lot of the examples we're gonna cover this quarter come from analyses of what are called scanner panel data. And one of the leading providers is called AC Nielsen, and they maintain two large data sets that have been around for 20 years and are really well validated and widely used. The first one, they enroll tens of thousands of households in a panel where they pay them in exchange for sending in every receipt, every printed and email receipt for every purchase the household makes each month. So for around 50,000 households, they know everything they bought in every retailer they transacted with. Bless you. The other is called retail scanner data. So Nielsen purchases the digital register data from most of the large retail chains that you shop at. Practically all of the grocery and all of the drug, most of the large it's called mass retailers as well. I think the one major exception I'm aware of is Costco. It doesn't sell data into Nielsen. So you can only get the Costco data from the panel. And may recall an event that happened 6 years ago. There was an illness that was going around, and we stayed at home for a while. And after the shutdown began, about 2 months later, there was an event at the White House. How many people know Goya Foods? They sell a lot of packaged foods. They're really famous for their cans of beans, adobo, a lot of Latin staples. The CEO of Goya was at the White House and said, "We're very blessed to have a leader at this time." And in response, some politicians, they did effectively free advertising for Goya Foods. And immediately, there was over 100,000 tweets calling from political opponents, calling for boycotts of Goya Foods, given the political statement or context in which the CEO made his remark. And there were over 50,000 tweets opposing those, calling for what's called a boycott, support this brand because of the political statement that it has made. And not everybody uses Twitter, but there were also hundreds of news articles amplifying this message. So boycotts versus boycotts. Now, if you're working in marketing at Goya, this is not a fun time for you. There's a lot going on, and maybe sales going to go up if the boycott dominates. Maybe it's going to go down if the boycott dominates. But even given a short run effect, are we going to be losing our best customers? What's going to happen in the long term? Should we embrace this? Should we make further political statements? Should we pull it back? Should we try to walk it back somehow? Very confusing time at a brand. And as you can see, this is from the Nielsen data. This is total Goya brand sales. It's detrended to take out seasonality. And you can see that when the shutdown first happened, you get a huge, enormous spike in sales, which we're going to be at home for a while. Yeah, buy some shelf-stable pantry items. It's going to keep, along with every shred of toilet paper you can find. And then this was 2 months later. This boycott event produced a spike that was about a third as large as when the pandemic first happened. That's a big spike. And I'm going to summarize a lot of complicated econometrics into a couple of sentences for you. This was done by a friend of mine at Cornell, a very careful analysis using county level data from all 3,000 US counties. They correlated the change in brand sales with the county's historical voting record. So they characterized counties by how far right and how far left the county had tended to vote in the past. And they graphed over 100 major brands by how disproportionately they were purchased in left-leaning versus right-leaning counties. And what they found was that Goya was one of the most predominantly purchased in left-leaning counties compared to right-leaning counties. But sales increase dominated primarily because the boycott movement exposed the brand to new customers who had never purchased it before. And the boycott movement was largely ineffective at changing the sales among the loyal customers. So it turned out it was a pretty strong positive for the brand. But without the customer data available, it would be very hard to reach a similar conclusion. Now, they also made the decision not to lean farther into that direction. Maybe they were worried about keeping their sales in those left-leaning counties. So an example of using customer data to make pretty challenging decision without it. Okay, this is the most widely accepted classification of analytics frameworks. 2 by 2. One variable is time orientation. The other variable is the type of analysis. So descriptive analytics is the simplest we can do. It's basically, what are the facts? How much did my sales go up or down last quarter? What fraction of coupons got redeemed? How many people who saw the ad clicked on the ad? Those facts tend to lead us to the evaluative questions. Why did that happen? And that's where diagnostic analytics comes in. So A/B test is a canonical example of diagnostic analytics, understanding why something happened. Both of those are looking backward. Predictive, we can build predictions off of causal models, but we usually don't. We usually use correlational models to build predictive models. Correlations often tend to be pretty stable, and so they tend to support predictions pretty well. Whereas causal models, because they're isolating individual causes, they often discard a lot of correlational information. And so causal can help in predictive modeling, but we don't usually need it. So this is often used in things like inventory planning, demand forecasting, allocating units to stores based on what we expect demand at each store to be. And then finally, prescriptive. And that is using data to calibrate computer algorithms that determine what decisions we should make. So this is best used in settings where we make decisions repeatedly with clear criteria. We understand them very well. They've become stable. Then we can automate them. And even after we automate those, we have to monitor those systems very carefully, because if something important or fundamental changes, those decisions can spin off the rails. Now, probably the most used customer analytics framework is called the funnel or the customer purchase journey. 2 names for the same thing. And the idea is pretty simple. We're going to define a set of stages that most customers are going to go through in our life cycle, where we can measure each of those stages in each period of time. Now, the stages and the ordering will depend on the context. I'm going to take an e-commerce retailer. Think of like a Shopify store that you might have seen advertised on Instagram. That'll be the context to illustrate. So you have a store. You first want to get users to visit your store. So you might measure that with how many people your analytics software shows you visited the web page each week. After they visit, you want them to do something. Maybe they click through to a product detail page. Maybe you define activation as scrolling down the page. Maybe you define it as adding a product to a cart, or maybe you have multiple steps for each of those. Convert means they actually pull the trigger, they put in their card information, their shipping address, and they purchase something. Retain means they come back and they buy again. Facilitate next purchase. That means develop. What else are we going to be able to sell them? And then finally, do they leave a review? Do they post the store on their social media? Do they tell somebody offline, refer a friend? And it's shaped like a funnel because as we proceed down these stages, we get fewer and fewer people taking the deeper actions. That's what we expect. And it's useful because we can track which points in that funnel were strongest and which points were weakest. And we can track the rates of moving deeper from each stage to the next over time. So if a competitor comes in with a compelling value proposition, we're probably going to get a drop off somewhere in here. Or if our quality consistency declines or improves, we're going to see the changes showing up here. Now, these are usually summary statistics. They don't tell us necessarily why the changes are happening. They alert us to what's going on so that we can investigate more deeply when we need to. This graph illustrates responses from a survey of 800 e-commerce analytics professionals. It graphs a bunch of different e-commerce analytics frameworks according to perceived value and perceived difficulty of use. The most valuable, A/B testing. Most stores are running 3 to 5 A/B tests every month. The least valuable, pop-ups. Interrupting your customer, distracting them from what they came there to do. Has anybody ever seen a pop-up on a web page before? Like practically every single web page. I was just checking how many people are awake. 60%. You're doing well, stay with me. So I'm gonna argue there's a few reasons that pop-ups are so common. Yeah, they're easy to implement. Yeah, they're cheap. But I think another reason is that they don't get tested rigorously. I think they get evaluated incorrectly. So let's say as a retailer, you have an email list. You want to activate users on your email list, for example, by sending them promotions if they haven't come back to the store in a while. The more emails you have of potentially interested people, the higher your activation rate when you want to engage in that tactic. So you want to get more emails. So you test the pop-up. Hey, give us your email. You're not going to get less emails, right? You're going to run an A/B test. How many more emails do we get when we use this pop-up? You're clearly going to get more emails. But are you testing the negative indicator in the same test? Has anybody ever heard of a bounce rate? What's a bounce rate?
That's leaves the site or never greater commission.
Exactly. When the customer's website session ends, it just means we don't observe them to do anything else after that point. Usually it's inferred by a period of either 5 minutes or 30 minutes of inactivity. So when we show the pop-up, how does our bounce rate change? It's not going to go down, right? It's only going to increase when we interrupt people. And now we have a trade-off. Is the extra email worth the extra bounce rate? And I'm making an argument that I think my experience has been that negative indicators are not tested in conjunction with positive indicators as often as they should be. So I think it's an incomplete evaluation that leads to overuse of pop-ups. Certainly they're profitable sometimes, but I think they get overused. Yes.
Like sometimes when you play games, they have pop-ups that are really difficult to close. So you accidentally click into them, and that might be perceived as a positive for the companies doing the pop-ups. Yeah, you click into the link, but obviously you don't want to, and it's a negative experience for you.
You know the company gets paid for the click usually, right? Yeah, PPC, advertising, pay per click. So the game companies do what? They game the PPC model. They basically trick the users into clicking, or sometimes they reward the user for clicking with an in-game consideration, extra life, extra ability. So actually, video game advertising, especially on mobile, it's a wild, let's call it a wild west. Okay. How many of you guys are graduating this quarter? Oh, most. Okay. How many people are currently job searching? Okay. If you want to go into analytics, you're going to be in a job interview, and they're going to say, "Do you have any questions for us?" Well, here are some questions you can ask. Number one, who's in charge of analytics? What is their position, and who are they? And you hope that their position starts with the word chief. Number two, suppose you hire me as a business analyst. What does my career trajectory within your organization look like? And you should hear a second job title that has to do with data or analytics. And you should also hear a third job title if it's a big company. And if they haven't set that up yet, that's a tell. 3 and 4, I'm not sure if you're going to ask about that or not. But the way analytics usually works in the best organizations is you got a centralized team that makes the standard decisions that help other teams to work together using data. Like, what's our database format going to be across the entire organization? How are we going to query it? What type of software are we going to use to run various models, etc. But that centralized team tends to be very insular. And the people who are actually making the data-driven decisions, they are on the product teams. They report to the executives with P&L responsibility. And so usually you want distributed analysts who interface with that centralized team, but they sit with those decision makers to enable trust. Finally, no matter how good you are or how good a company is at analytics, there's typically going to be some frameworks where you want to outsource the framework because of the specialized expertise that the external party offers. And then there will be other really critical frameworks that even if you're not the very best in the world at doing it, you want to keep it in-house because you can't afford to potentially lose control of it to someone else. I think there are, at a very rough approximation, 3 types of environments. One, there are great analytics environments or very good. Most of our tech companies are going to fall into that category. 2, I think there are environments where analytics remains dramatically underused, where the practice is still fairly nascent. 3, I think there are environments where analytics is commonly misused. I think you can have a really good experience if you go somewhere that analytics are underused. I think you can have a really bad experience if you go somewhere where analytics are often misused. I think that can really set back your professional development. There are a lot of stars that have to align for a company that was not born digital first to start using analytics in a really productive way. And the 3 categories of challenges that I've seen relate to the decision makers, the staff, and the corporate environment. A lot of executives are MBAs. And MBA education has started incorporating a lot of analytics content over the last 10 years. But a lot of the senior executives, they got their MBA 20, 30 years ago. And they may or they may not really understand what's possible. There was an article in New York Magazine circa 2014. And it related a story that that occurred where a man had a 15-year-old daughter, and Target, they shopped at Target. Target sent a mailer to their house, which was emphasizing diapers, maternity clothing, and infant formula. And later, the man found out that his daughter was pregnant and believed that Target's mailer system had inferred that she had been pregnant before he knew about it. And he got really upset about this. And that led to this journalist writing an article about Target's machine learning system that decided which promotions to send to which customers for which reasons. And this article got a ton of play in business schools. And you can go back, read the article. It's really easy to find. It was really famous at the time. And the strange thing is that the article presented the story as if this was what had happened. The machine learning system figured out that the daughter was pregnant before the family did. And that's like magic. And it's entirely possible that that happened. There are some signals in sales data that would probably indicate possible pregnancy with a really high probability. Like if you bought a home pregnancy test, or if you started buying larger clothes at a certain age. So it is possible that that happened. It's also entirely possible that it was a type 1 error or a type 2 error. So the fact that this story got so much attention so broadly in business schools goes to the general observation that some people they view data as like an oracle. And it can have that type of property, but it usually doesn't. Usually we're missing the things we most want to know because they're held private, like individual customer willingness to pay. Analysts, one of the challenges, it's really common. Sometimes you get really brilliant people who are really well qualified, who have no interest in what they're doing. I was consulting at one company, and my handler was a PhD in operations management from UC Berkeley. She was really, really smart. She was in the office from about 10:30 to about 2 o'clock every weekday, and she would always go out to lunch with the team. And I noticed pretty quickly, I was going to get one email back from her each day. So whatever I write in my email, I better write it carefully to get what I need, because the next email back won't be until tomorrow at the earliest. And when I talk with her, if I ask her about her garden, oh, she had so many things to say. But if I ask her about her team or her role or her current project, it's like one sentence. Like she was really not interested in what she was doing. It was not a capability problem. It was not a training problem. It just was lack of interest. And I've met a number of people that fit that profile. You know, maybe somebody got a physics PhD or a math PhD because they love physics or they love math. And then they graduate and it's time to support the family and go into analytics. That's a good, safe, well-paid career path that fits their skill set. And they can probably learn marketing or whatever discipline they're in a couple of weekends if they really want to. It's not that complicated, you know. But if the want to is missing, there's no substitute for that. So that's one of the challenges I think that comes up sometimes. Finally, corporate culture. There are cultures where bringing bad news that's critical of a different team clearly gets punished. It's seen as antagonistic. there are cultures where the decisions are always made like seat of the pants, like last minute. Like, hey, I need this analysis tomorrow. And then next week, I need this analysis by tomorrow. And there's never time to look back over the last 20 analyses. What went good, what went bad, what could we learn to improve into the future? Whereas there's other good environments where like it's really patient and disciplined decision-making with continuous improvement. And it isn't bad news that gets punished. It's failure to learn from past mistakes that gets punished. So those are the three categories. I hope you're able to stay out of dysfunctional environments. I think the other two types of environments can be great to go into. Couple things that I find are generally true, and then we'll wrap up in this section and talk about the course for a few minutes. B2C means selling to customers. That's larger numbers of potential customers than B2B. A lot of successful B2B companies have a handful of customers, usually larger organizations. So there's just more data in consumer-facing markets than in business-facing markets. The second one is selection versus treatment. In marketing, selection effects tend to be pretty large. Treatment effects exist, but they tend to be pretty small. An example of selection versus treatment is in estimating the returns on education. Like, what is the effect of your college degree on your lifetime career earnings? You can't simply compare people who graduate college to people who don't graduate college, because you're going to have an ability factor, among other factors, that separate people into college versus not college. The one exception to that is price. Price has big treatment effects. You usually notice the price treatment effects in raw data, and that's why we're going to focus on demand modeling throughout the course. Number three, external agencies. You hire the external agency because it has unique expertise that you don't have, and you pay them a premium for that expertise. And that means you're not able to evaluate all of their statements because you don't have all of their expertise, which enables them to lie to you sometimes. And sometimes they do, because sometimes that lying is profitable and sometimes it reduces their future costs. So unfortunately, we have to consider moral hazard and principal agent problems when we hire external specialists. And finally, this one made me laugh at first, and it made me think the third time I heard it. How many people know what LaTeX is? Okay, way more than my other sections. If you didn't raise your hand, LaTeX is an open source mathematical publishing language. Makes it really easy to code your documents, and the equations look really pretty. It's you know, if your professors, most of them are writing their research papers using LaTeX. My syllabus is in LaTeX, so if it looks a little different, that's the reason why. What I heard at Amazon multiple times was that if a write-up was written in LaTeX, empirically, that tended to correlate with analyst quality. And I thought it was silly the first time I heard it, but then as I saw more documents and I got them critically, I came to see that was sort of a regularity. Okay, so some terms that were, yes.
Yeah, I have a question specifically about the last slide previously about identifying areas of where analytics needs to be implemented.
Yeah.
So as young people going into the workforce, how can we best identify areas within our firm that may require more implementation of analytics from your experience?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it's going to be rare that as young people entering a workforce, you're going to have the ability to do that. So that's why I would focus more on trying to select the type of environment that you can enter rather than exerting control in an environment after you enter. Unfortunately, it starts at the top. So it's difficult to change initially.
Thank you.
Okay, so people go shopping because they want stuff. And the reason they go shopping, that's called the core need. And the core benefit is what they derive from, it's what they hope to get out of making a purchase. That's why they give us their money. The consumer is the one who experiences the core benefit. The customer is the one who pays. Can anyone think of a setting where the consumer is not the customer?
Maybe anything with children, like if you buy a child a toy.
Canonical example, parents buying things for their children. Children consumes, parent buys. If anybody in here is lucky enough to have their tuition paid by their parents, you're the consumer. Mom and or dad is the customer.
Would a company buying software that's used by the employees?
Certainly there are different departments within the company, and oftentimes the purchasing department is not the one who's going to be using the software. So yeah, you could have intra-organizational customer consumer distinctions. Good example. Has anybody here ever purchased cat food before? Were you the consumer? Guess what is the best predictor of the flavor of cat food that a customer buys?
Their personal preference.
That's exactly it. It's an empathy gap. People who tend to buy a lot of chicken tend to buy a lot of chicken flavored cat food. Salmon, salmon. Others, others. And it's so easy to actually just test which flavor the cat wants. Just open 2 cans and put them on the floor. You're usually going to get a clear signal, but it doesn't seem to be a common practice.
Is that where all those ads come from of like, oh, your dog or cat doesn't eat really good, like they eat the same processed food all over again? Like our food is made of like all these nutrient like rich things. So could that kind of come from that idea? Like why they do that type of ad marketing?
Well, the pet owner is responsible for the pet. And if the pet has health problems, the pet owner is either going to pay or they're going to feel terrible, right? So if we can reduce our long-term veterinarian bills by buying healthier food up front, that seems like a very logical idea, which if the pet food manufacturer is paying for those high quality ingredients, might help them to sell more units and justify a higher margin.
Would also government and government services specifically be a service that is being bought indirectly by consumers since we pay taxes?
Certain programs, for sure, Medicare pays, right? And the recipients benefit. Okay, 2 more levels. Product level. I'm going to use the word product as shorthand for any commercial product, service, or experience that promises to deliver a core benefit. In most mature markets, the surviving products offer similar performance on core benefit. And so they differentiate themselves through the features of the products that are bundled along with the aspect that provides the core benefit. Those features provide additional benefits. They may be tangible, they may be intangible, such as a feeling or a change in risk. The value proposition is usually a verbal statement that describes the firm's belief about the value it's offering to its target segment. Contribution margin is price less marginal cost, and competitor is any other approach toward addressing the core need, including not addressing the core need, just living with the problem. And so as we go into the market level, market is defined by a group of customers that share a common core need. Within most markets, we have multiple customer segments. Segments differ between customers differ between segments and are similar within segments. The targeting decision is the firm's decision of which group of customers to try to serve. And in most cases, the firm will not try to serve the entire market. They'll try to target their offering. And so the question down here at the bottom, in what markets does Uber compete with Zoom? What would be the core need that would lead someone to consider either Uber or Zoom? Commuting is a classic example. Do I go into the office and see everybody, or do I stay at home and just see them online? Another possibility is just a simpler meeting. I gotta talk with this person. If Uber is offering a lower price this day, I might get in a car to get the benefit of the third dimension. Or if Uber is expensive, then I'm gonna stay at home and log in. Okay, if you are interviewing for marketing roles, most of your interviews will expect you to be conversant with the 3 C's, STP, and 4 P's framing. This is very widely used in the marketing industry. It's the main way marketing gets taught, and it's very useful. I don't focus on it because it's primarily conceptual and it doesn't map onto data very well. The 3 C's, the idea is situation analysis, understanding who we're competing against, what we are good and weak at, what our customer wants. That's been expanded more recently to also incorporate collaborators, external entities that we could work together with to generate increased customer value. Or context, which refers to things like regulatory requirements or the current cultural moment. And the idea is once you've analyzed the market through the 3 or the 5 C's, you're going to go through the STP process. And we are going to talk about that in depth because that is very amenable to analytics. And we'll talk about that next week. And then once you've set up your strategy, you implement that using the traditionally what was called the 4 P's. It's sometimes expanded out to 10 P's. You set your price, you determine your product features, you decide where to offer your product, which is really about closing the last mile between the customer and the product to minimize transportation costs. And then you promote, you tell people about it, or you encourage them to sample it. Now, if you're a junior and you like this class content, I would encourage you to take MGT 103. They really go deep into this stuff. We're going to implement, that's where our depth is, and we're going to sacrifice some of the broader content due to our time constraint. A couple of links here that can help you get started if you're interviewing for those roles. I recommend you spend some time. It's probably going to pay off. Now, turning to the class, I received this communication on LinkedIn last July. This person was in your chair 12 months ago. Then he graduated and he went into a role in sales demand at a food producer. And he gives really good advice. But first he described his role. That's why he wrote to me. He said, demand modeling in food is, he used the word stagnant, but I think what he meant to say is well applied due to the predictable repurchasing cycles. But I found that because the products are perishable and seasonal, a lot of the planning still happens visually, looking at historical sales against supply forecasts. The allocation process is a guesstimate. What prices we sold to before were price discriminating across retailers. And then kind of feel how much we give to them based on the supply forecast. He said, I started making demand curves for different customers, or I'm sorry, for different products using marginal costs as exogenous variation, which is what we do in here. And now testing out with some heterogeneity. Even though demand is relatively stable, adjusting prices when supply fluctuates can be tough. Having a clearer understanding of the demand curve could help us plan those price adjustments. If time permits, I'll try a demand forecasting model paired with demand curves and supply forecast and compare it to our human plan. And then we'll triangulate. And you'll hear me say that a lot this quarter. As you mentioned, pricing is often heuristic based on competitor prices and adding a premium. That premium is often just a starting point and then changed over time. There's an opportunity for analytics to bring more structure, especially when adding premium, sweeter products under different labels to market, estimating how that will do. And then he's also talking about customer retention and development, and he's shadowing his sales team to learn more about that process. So I was blown away that he could even write an email like that within a month of graduating. I was not capable of that at the same age. And then on Monday, I just thought of him again and I said, what advice would you give to people who are in this class? And he gave better advice than I think I would give. He said, go to lecture, stay engaged, do the homework right after. Helps you retain material and makes midterm prep much easier, often just a few hours. Don't be nervous by the coding or the math. Focus on understanding what's happening and why. It may seem intimidating with the curve and the big data concepts, but staying consistent makes the material easier to digest and saves you a lot of time. So I would co-sign everything he said. And I wish I had made it so concise. I wrote a fairly complete syllabus. My apologies for its length. If you haven't read it, you should. I'm not gonna repeat it except for one very important point. I'm just gonna say a couple things here, mostly talk about language models. DataCamp is an excellent source of data for data about analytics. And they list data scientist skills. And the first one they list is Python. And I agree that's the most important because it's the most used for data engineering and for some machine learning. The second one they list is R. They say if Python is king, R is the queen. It's best for basically modeling and visualization. In this class, we mostly focus on modeling and visualization. So that's why we're going to use R. The one thing I'm going to repeat from the syllabus, if you have anything we love to interact with you guys, questions, challenges, personal note, whatever it may be, statement, story. I want you to use the Piazza board, which is linked from Canvas. Got 300 students. I've tried to manage that by email before. I can't handle it. It's too much. Piazza is more efficient. It's more fair because the same information can be made available to everybody at the same time. It's better for you guys because you can see something on Piazza that clarifies a question that you didn't even realize you had yet. And as an instructional team, we coordinate and we need to have the same information available to us. And so sometimes we need to look back. So as a result of all of that, if you send me or Kohei an email or a Canvas message, we're going to say, thank you for your message, but I need you to post this to all instructors on Piazza and we will answer it there. So just skip that speed bump and just post to Piazza. If it's about the class, make it public. You can be anonymous if you want. If you post it privately about the class, we're going to set it to public so everybody has access to the same public information. If it's private, that's perfectly good too. We'll keep it private. If it's about you specifically, that others wouldn't need the information. Okay, the last topic here is about language models, which super hot topic, super useful technology. Is it a bubble? Probably. And here's the empirical basis for the claim. This data comes from Metter, which is an industry nonprofit, probably the leading industry nonprofit in this area. Each data point is from a different point in time. The y-axis measures the number of hours that a human expert would need to complete a task. And we're measuring frontier AI model capabilities and how they have improved over this time span. And if the AI is judged to complete the human expert task with 50% reliability, how many hours long does that task last? And we see that it's showing exponential growth according to this recent data. And we can fit a couple of different curves to the existing training data, and they make wildly different predictions about where we're going. if we fit an exponential curve, we're going to assume that the recent exponential growth will continue into the indefinite future. Just like Ehrlich assumed that the recent population growth in the world would continue and everyone would starve. And you can see that given the recent change, those exponential predictions are forecasting 100-fold or 200-fold improvements within the next 2.5 years, which is a wildly out of sample prediction because the sample goes from 0 to 2.5. And if we're making predictions out at 200 or 250, we are wildly out of the range of our training data. Alternatively, we can fit a sigmoid, an S-curve, to the training data, which assumes that growth accelerates and then decelerates, and is a much more common empirical pattern in similar data sets. And you can see the predictions over the same time horizon of an S-curve here, that's the blue line. Continued improvements, but leveling off at some point. So something I think you should be thinking about is what's going to happen in the near future. If you believe in these forever exponential improvement curves, I think you should probably go to the beach and enjoy the time that we have remaining. If you believe that it seems unlikely that exponential growth would continue forever, that it might start to level off at some point, I believe you should continue to invest in your skill set, which is likely to make your language model use more productive. I was an early adopter. I've been a pro user for 2 years now. I use it for a broad range of tasks, most successfully, some unsuccessfully. I find pretty clearly the more domain knowledge I have, the more effectively I use it. Because there are some tasks where I know more, I can write a better prompt. I usually get better output, then I can evaluate the output more accurately. There's other tasks where I know less. My prompt is a disaster, the output is a disaster, and I don't necessarily know how to fix it. So I think that analyst skill is a complement to effective language model use. As a result, I spent some time on Sunday writing up how I personally currently use LLMs and don't use LLMs. Now, what I don't use them for, I do not use them to communicate with other people, because people use them to communicate with me. And I feel like I can tell which messages have been written by LLM and which haven't. And I really don't want to read the output of your language model. Like, I would much rather just read your prompt. At least that's like, it feels human, you know, it's like a little bit intimate. Like, language model is so standard, it's so stale, it's so long, it's so verbose. I don't want to give anyone the impression that I don't care about them. And that's why I don't use language model to communicate with other people. If you're worried about grammar or whatever, give me your bad grammar. I'm fine with it. Don't give me your language model. I do not use them to read challenging material that I care about, because it's hard to read that type of material. I've built up that skill over many years. I do not want to lose that skill. I think it's really important. And they may or may not be able to summarize it accurately. Sometimes they don't. The creative aspect of my job or the architecting of the code that I write, I keep that myself. I never trust that their code works. I always check it. And finally, if I'm writing anything that I care about, I write it. Because the process of writing is almost perfectly analogous with the process of thinking. And I don't want to lose that ability. I've developed it really carefully in my role. Just like a calculator or a spell checker, whatever tools you rely on, your internal capability will degrade if you use that tool all the time. And so those are the skills that differentiate me from some of my peers. And those are the ones I want to maintain, so I don't use it for that. Now, I do use them all the time, and my current tooling is Claude Code. I always manually set the effort mode to max. I use it in the terminal because the terminal will always throw an error, which helps the agent to figure out what went wrong and how it should react. I do use it to suggest designs of plans, which I critically evaluate, and I use it to write the lower level code. I ask it to check its output against my prompt before it gives the output back to me. And I have to ask it that a lot of times. And then even then, sometimes it forgets. But it'll often catch its own errors and fix them before I check the output. Troubleshooting computer errors, it's phenomenal at that. It's way better than I am. So I rely on it for that a lot. I use it to improve my writing, to criticize it or to copy edit, catch errors or make suggestions. It's way better than Google at this point, in my opinion. So I use it for most of my web searches. And when I want to learn something simple, it's really good at summarization. The one principle I'd add on top of that discussion is I'm really suspicious of free language models. I think my experience is they can be worse than useless. They can waste more time than they save. That's why I only use subscription models. Now, all of that reflects my particular job. I spend most of my time doing research, designing pedagogical materials. Accuracy is really high, really important in my world. Everybody's going to have their own optimal use and non-use cases. I just want to encourage you. The benefits are so salient, right? But the costs are also, they exist and they may be less obvious. So I would encourage you to think about how you use it. And I'm just curious, is anybody willing to share an example? Have you observed language model use to hold back your education in any way?
So if you just give a question for your class, then it will search the entire internet for the answers and won't find the direct answer that your professor wants based on the text against on the source.
That's a really great point, and I would generalize that a little bit. The language models are all trained on all of the internet. You have every perspective in the world on the internet. The prompt determines the sequence that follows the prompt. And the language model will predict which of the many available answers in the training data you wanted based on the prompt that you wrote. It's very different from the idea of an accurate answer. If the model has accurately labeled truth in its training data for that particular question, you may well get an accurate answer even if you wrote a bad prompt. But if it's a perspective, the model has every perspective because it's got all of the internet.
And a lot of the text in there. It's also in language. And when I try to summarize the word, I actually usually do it. And it wouldn't do it. It just wouldn't even try to process it.
That's interesting. There do seem to be political considerations that constrain language model responses from the major labs recently. So if you're searching sensitive topics, can you trust it or not? That's a question mark. Probably depends on the model and the topic.
It's in your principles, but some of them tend to hallucinate sources pretty bad. You really can't trust most of the sources it gives you.
Yeah, it depends on the quality of the model, but even with the best model I can find and pay for, it's at least once a week that it gives me things that don't exist. And then I say, oh, you gave me that. And it said, yeah, I hallucinated that. Yeah, you have to click and confirm. Anybody over here willing to share a use case where you found it limited your education?
Last quarter, I took a coding class and one of our assignments was to use GitHub Copilot for like the whole assignment and just see what it did. And I honestly found that it took me longer because I had to keep on saying, oh, that was wrong, try again, try again. And you don't understand why it's wrong.
Yeah, so coding is the canonical use case because there's phenomenal training data on Stack Overflow and other resources, right? So, there's been memes about software development has been searching Stack Overflow, like that's the main function of software developers and a lot of companies for many years. But there has to be a certain type of code that you're writing for Stack Overflow to be the best source for that type of code. Okay, so we could probably keep going if we wanted to, but I'm going to ask you on Canvas, not right now. One of the central things that we need for analytics is data. Where does data come from? It comes from measurement. So I'm going to ask you, how are you going to measure your inputs into this class? And I'm going to ask you not to respond by saying your grade, that's an output. And your grade, as you probably know, is going to be based on a stack ranking, because that's how many companies, many of the best analytics companies, are ranking their employees for promotion and retention. Stack ranking. So that's what we do in here. So we rank everybody at the end of the quarter. So your own personal grade depends a lot on your output, but it also depends on everybody else's output as well. So my question to you is, how would you measure your inputs to this class at the end of the quarter? We're going to spend some time, not a lot of time, going through our week 1 script. I write the code scripts with a lot of comments to enable you to read them start to finish and understand them. If the script is 600 lines, it's really probably only 45, 50 lines of code and 500 some lines of explanation. This script is going to focus primarily on data checking and visualization. You guys have used tidyverse a lot. I started coding when I was 6 years old in 1982 using a VIC-20. The 20 stood for 20 kilobytes, which was how far you could expand the memory. I've been coding for a very long time. The number one thing I would say to anybody who's not super experienced on coding is I personally find it really fun to write a ton of code all at once. And that tends to be unproductive because every line of code can interact with every other line of code to produce unexpected errors. And so the potential problems you introduce when you write a bunch of code without testing any of it is like exponential in the size of that code. So what you should do, and what I do, is exert some discipline. You write one line of code, you test it against its expectations. You run it, did it give you what you expected? You write the next line of code, you test it. So if you struggle with code, I would first of all encourage you go slow to go fast. Slow down and test each small chunk as you go. Secondly, the reason the pipe has become so popular is because it inverts the traditional way of programming, where you have to read from the inside out. It enables you to read it from left to right. So if you aren't familiar with this or you're not practiced at using it, I think you should adopt it. I think after a small learning cost, you're going to like it a lot. The code script is on our GitHub content webpage. We'll come back to this in a few minutes. We're going to pull in the tidyverse library. You're going to need to download the class data, unzip it, put it somewhere on your machine, and then update the path so that R can access it. And after you do that, you're going to be able to create customer data. The very first thing I always do when I get a new data set is I literally open it and I look at it. I look at it because I don't know what I don't know. I don't know what I'm gonna learn by looking at it. I don't wanna waste my time. So if I can see things here that I didn't expect, I'll be more productive when I analyze it. Now, this data set is smartphone sales data in the college student market. We've got some customer attributes, we've got some usage attributes, we've got some product attributes for 6 smartphone products over 3 years, 3 purchase cycles. We're going to treat each generation of smartphone as a separate market. So we've got customer gender, height in inches, the size of their hand, which will weekly predict which size phone they purchase. We have what they use the phone for, how many minutes per week they use it for gaming, for chat, for maps, video, social, or reading, total minutes. Those reflect customer needs. We've got how long they've had the phone, measured in days, and then we round that up to the nearest year to measure markets. Now, when the customers went to purchase their phone, some of them had discounts offered to them. They had at most 1 phone available on discount. The 6 phones that we're gonna analyze are from 3 manufacturers, Huawei, Samsung, and Apple, in 2 sizes, small and large. So we've kind of simplified that for you a little bit. So in this first case, customer on row number 1 had Huawei's big phone available at 10% discount, but they decided to buy Huawei's small phone. Customer number 2 had no discount available. They bought Huawei's big phone. Customer 3 had Samsung's small phone available on discount, and that's the one they purchased. So you'll see some variation, some correspondence, but not perfect correspondence between if there was a discount, which one was, and what they decided to buy. This discount is going to give us the exogenous price variation we need to estimate a causal demand relationship, causal effective price on sales. Finally, we've got the size of the screen measured in inches and a customer review of the phone they bought. I'm going to go ahead and skip down to the visualization portion of the script. It's not that the data checking is unimportant. It's that I trust you can go through that, and different people need the explanation to different degrees. So the visualization portion is starting on row 332. So you may be aware that there's base R and there's tidyverse, and those are different things. Tidyverse is built on top of base R. Base R is open source. It's mostly maintained by academic statisticians and programmers. And it started in the 90s. It's very academic in its flavor, and it remains that way. Tidyverse is offered and maintained by a company called Posit. Posit is a B Corp. That's a new, relatively new corporation structure. It was codified into law within the last 20 years. It differs from a C Corp or an S Corp in a very important way. While it still seeks to make profits, it also has written into its incorporation documents a social purpose that it is legally bound to try to achieve. In Posit's case, its social purpose is spreading and providing access to data analysis and visualization. So that's why it's a big part of the reason why Posit continues to maintain Tidyverse and multiple IDEs and other tools. So one of the things I like about Tidyverse a lot is the defaults are really thoughtfully chosen. I don't know about your aesthetic sensibility. For me, this default box plot looks so much nicer than the base R box plot. That's the first thing I like about ggplot. The second thing I like about ggplot is that it gives me a great deal of power in making visualizations. I have a lot more flexibility than what I have in base R. So to illustrate that, I've exercised some of that power in this second box plot. So we've colored in different parts of the box plot. We're using alpha to make some of the outlying points transparent so we can see when they overlay each other. We've thrown some labels on there, a title, and we've adopted one of the default themes, which is a great way to easily make your visualization prettier. Now, box plot is great. I like that as a univariate summary very much. Personally, I like the histogram better. I don't want to assume that it's unimodal. I want to see what the distribution looks like. Box plot isn't going to tell you how many modes there are. I want to see, is it symmetric? Is it asymmetric? Where are the tails longer? How fat are they? You do have some degrees of freedom in drawing a histogram, such as how many bins. If you increase the number of bins, you're going to get a more granular distribution, like chunkier. Or if you standardize the width of the bins, such as by the units of measurement, you're going to more clearly count how many customers fall into each of the various buckets you might care about. And of course, just like before, you can make your box plot prettier. I'm sorry, your histogram prettier. And I generally encourage you to spend the time to improve your output and make it better for your consumer. So those are a couple of univariate visualizations. Next up, we're going to go through a couple of bivariate visualizations. This first one is simply going to count customers by brand. And what you can see very quickly is that Apple has the most customers in this data set, a little over 1,200 out of 3,000. That's like a 41% share, followed by Samsung, pretty close number 2, followed by Huawei, a little bit more distant in 3rd place, but still a substantial market share. We can make that pretty using some colors, throw some labels on there. How many of you know about facets? Okay, this is worth the time then. So scatter plot, we can go through briefly. Scatter plot, when I check data, when I first get it, I like to look at the scatter plot with some transparency so I can see where it's denser or less dense. This one, just graphing hand size versus height. The reason I choose those pair of variables is I have a very clear hypothesis before I look at the data. I expect that taller people probably have bigger hands. I don't know how tight that relationship is. The data bears out my expectation, and it looks like it's a very tight relationship overall. Although for a given height, there is some degree of dispersion. I could have made this a little better if I started the y-axis from 0. I am maximizing the variation displayed here a little bit. I should probably fix that in a future version. Okay, so then going into, we can throw a trend line on there. That's pretty normal, no biggie. Going into facets. Okay, this is the histogram of weekly minutes of usage for Apple that we just constructed. And this is the histogram for Samsung. Looks a little different. And this is the histogram for Huawei. And I probably made that pretty challenging for you to compare across brands. And that's where facets comes in. Facets makes it really easy to stack graphics to facilitate visual comparisons. So 600 to 602 recreates those same 3 histograms without subsetting the data. It just splits the data by brand and then graphs the weekly minutes of usage within each brand. So this really facilitates the visual comparisons. And as always, we should make that pretty. Maybe use some consistent colors for each brand. I think my last point is coming up. And that point is going to be, somewhere in the script, I'm just going to tell you. Oh, I think it's here. ggplot gives you a lot of power control. You can use that to make the graph pretty. You can also use it to make it ugly. I don't know about you. To me, this is really ugly. So yeah, I recommend trying to make it interpretable and not make it worse. Okay, at the end of each script, I'm going to have some questions for reflection if you want to spend some extra time and understand things more deeply. These are not for turning in. You can probably get a good answer out of a language model if you don't want to work on this yourself. Just make sure to give it the whole script. Don't only give it the question at the end so that it has the full context. What I am going to ask you to do, if you want to, it's strictly optional, is you can enter a challenge. You can, so each week we'll have a challenge. The challenges will be very good preparation for the coding portion of your midterm. So this won't be just some random thing. This week, I'm gonna offer you the chance to graph Boya sales in right-leaning and left-leaning counties before and after a polarizing event. And if you want to enter the challenge, if you want to win, you should design your visualization to make a clear point and to be very easy to understand. Those are the criteria that we'll use to evaluate the submissions. We won't pick more than 5 winners, which means it's probably going to be pretty competitive. So if you only dump this in a language model and then dump the output back to us, you're probably not going to win. Any questions about the challenge? Yeah, this week, because of the ad drop deadline, it'll be due at the end of next week. But normally, all future weeks, it'll be due, I think it's Friday at 5 p.m. After class. So you'll have about a day and a half if you want to work on it. And I do have a survey up asking about yourselves. That's due on Sunday because we're going to graph that data next week. Also, I have an assignment for you to schedule a practice quiz at this computer-based testing facility so that you're familiar with that before the midterm week comes, hopefully to lower your anxiety a little bit. Yeah, I am so happy you're here. I think we're going to have a great quarter. You're going to get out of this class what you put into it. I'm really looking forward to working with you and really excited to see what you bring and learning from you as well. Thank you so much. I'll see you next week. I'm gonna have blank name tents the next 2 weeks, but not after week 3. Please bring it back. And then if you forget it after week 3, write on some other paper. Thanks.
That's fine.
Do my best for everything.
Try to find a thing for this.
Good, how are you? Great. Next, you go anywhere? This is part of the exercise. It's only a pretty long time here. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty excited. Are you in time behind the shop? Oh, yeah. No, I don't think you're behind the curve. Yeah, I think I'll be there. All right, bye. Have a good one. I tried to select them. So just kind of. Boys got that. Yes. Thank you, how are you? Thanks for all your contributions. Oh, yeah, no worries, yeah. I met you on. I know that's like final week, so I was curious if I'd be able to schedule that earlier somehow. Any other internship questions? Internship questions we can address at the same time? Okay. I've got probably 5 to 10 people in the exact same book. So I'm gonna suggest 2 course of action. One, you can probably negotiate the start date. If they'll understand that your university is still in session, or you can negotiate like that Friday off to come back. Now, I realize that's not ideal. Option 2, I've asked the computer testing facility, can my folks with internships, can you make an exception so they can take that quiz on Saturday, June 6th? And they said yes. I'm waiting on the specifics for how you schedule through that exception. And once I have that, I'll post it on Piazza for everybody to do first internship. Okay. I know neither is fully satisfactory, but I'm not even gonna write the test until that week 9. I'm not gonna have it available early. So I can't offer it before that week 10. Okay, yeah, no worries. Thank you. Yeah, I'm gonna thank for looking forward. Yeah. I just have like a quick question. Yeah. So nice. Usually the first meeting scares a fair number of people off. Okay. And yeah, usually the way this sorts out within a week or so. Rady has a huge priority in delayed graduation. So I'm not sure the optimal timing on this, but if the process doesn't serve your need, you have to tell Rady through the virtual advising center. And I expect they will make an exception for you. I don't think it's gonna be necessary, but if you get to like Friday or Monday and it's looking unlikely, initiate that process.
I already checked it during class. But you said, virtual advising?
Yeah, that's, they stopped advising by email, so that's the way to talk to them.
All right, sounds good. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
good luck.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Hi, Professor, I'm Peter.
That's great.
Yeah, so this is actually my, like, it's kind of like a deep coding class, which I've taken like after a long time. So do you have like any suggestions? Code?
It's gonna sound very basic. It's gonna be coding script, executed, read the comments. That's what those are there for. It's exactly that. Okay, so I'm not gonna ask you to write a ton of new code from scratch. I'm gonna ask you to repurpose the relevant code that I'm providing to you. Okay. So knowing what that code is the first step. That's why I give you.
Okay. Yeah, that's about it. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, you as well, Peter. I'm happy you're here.
Quick couple questions about the APM bit. So I read on the syllabus that it would multiple choice and short answer. Just like short answer, is that more gonna be like interpret this R code, or is it more like here's a concept that we learned in lecture? Write a short answer back to that.
It could in principle be either, but I'd expect more of the latter.
And then also, I mean, it's actually common. Everything is from the picture. I hate doing R on my laptop, so I just wanted like, are there any R like in class
If you were the win.
Like,
You're the winner, right?
I know the weekly competitions and the midterms both have the take home portions, but like, you know, is there any point where we're gonna have to pop open our laptop in class and then submit anything like that?
Not within the class
Like,
period.
not during, like, okay, great, cool.
Where do you like to use it?
So you can.
On my computer, just like,
Okay.
Sure, sure.
because I have,
But I can guarantee that people.
Full my screen.
Yeah.
plus, I have no mouse, this is my parents' laptop, it's my old one broke last quarter. Here's for this was recording.
There is something called positive.
Behind. Okay.
But,
That's all. I think it's me, Peter.
No,
Andrew,
yeah, sorry.
No, it's okay. Last guy was in Peter. Thanks.
yeah, but the Piazza
Just the
should
same.
be, yeah.
It should be fine.
Okay,
From my.
yeah, cause I saw, there was like questions already. I'm guessing it's an earlier question about the grade, so I noticed that it was
Yeah,
like.
it should be fine. Yes.
All the instructors.
Yeah, all the instructions are there.
And, okay, so is it based on like, okay.
Also attention.
Oh, okay, so all,
Yeah,
okay,
I'm not sure why you were.
in the.
No, I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay,
anything.
no worries, thank you.
I just think there's different styles that people have. Some people will never talk in class, no matter what I do. So I just try to enable people to direct their energy in the way that works for them. And I think there's some negative correlation in different styles, so it's unlikely empirically that someone's gonna win everything.
Got it, so, okay, got it, that makes sense, I was just
But
scared.
you
if I
do kind of have to try to do something.
Something, yeah,
Yeah.
that make, I was just scared if I keep losing confidence, does that mean I don't get an
I mean, it's hard to get an A. But I think the competitions will be very good preparation for the midterms. I don't know for sure because I'm not sure I'm doing competitions, but I sort of expect most people aren't gonna do these competitions in a sense.
Yeah.
So.
I just a new grading system, so, but I
Me too.
understand. Yeah, I'm an econ major, so
Yeah.
most of my grades are just midterms and final,
Yeah.
and like one homework assignment,
Yeah.
but I'm interested,
Oh, cool.
thank you,
Cool. Well, welcome. I'm looking forward to working with you.
thank you.